Another harrowing tale of utter brutality. You are never gonna believe where this story takes us. We open on a quaint little coastal town, where Richard awakens from an incredibly strenuous session of boudoir photography the previous evening. Million Dispatch is calling him in due to reports of missing persons and strange happenings about town. He soaks it all in while trying to just live his life how he wants to, outside of the influence of roaches. An impossible task. He has to put that on the back burner as he barely misses Homer, the town exterminator, while on his way to the local diner where Lillian gives him a little sugar to go with his coffee. She also gives him some fresh Ray-Bans before he heads out to meet the day. He's lucky she's got him looking sharp because he happens to be heading out to the air taxi to pick up his old girlfriend Beth, and she's looking so fit that he nearly erupts in his pants. As they drive, we learn that she's been gone for 4 years, and a lot's changed in that time. Many old businesses have closed, and Richard inherited the position of sheriff from his father after he died. Since everyone wants a piece of old Dick, they're flagged down by Mrs. Pennington the librarian looking to file a complaint about some ne'er-do-wells chewing the glue out of the binding of every book in the library overnight. A common indicator of pests, but also a significant crime if she thought it was true. Meanwhile, Cy's hitting up Mayor Johnson for some capital. Intech, a multinational corporation, is investing heavily to modernize the island. Cy's hoping to get a piece of that action to help his business and keep the tourists flowing in. Then Richard drops Beth off to spend some time with her dad, and they make plans to get together later. When she goes inside, it's revealed that Daddy is none other than Elias Johnson. Their tepid reunion signals an obviously tumultuous past, although they are happy to reunite, which is nice to see. Finally getting to his day, Richard starts with the report that Roger has gone missing and was last seen by the old lighthouse. There is no sign of him there. When he turns to leave, a strange buzzing sound gets his attention, but it just turns out to be Jake the old dog, pranking and drinking like he does.
You gonna marry my daughter, Chief?
An obvious cover for some deeply held insecurities and feelings of inadequacy. This is Beth's first time back on the island since her mom died, and it feels like walking through a mausoleum to her. Daddy Johnson apologizes for his emotional distance. He was just hurting so bad. Beth tries to clear her head by walking the grounds and finds a new camper that didn't used to be there, as well as a dog. Eventually, she runs up on the border of what is now the Intech development. Meanwhile, the dog is approached by a familiar sound we were trained to associate with Jake, but that appears to actually be coming from some miniature velociraptors. She hears its cries of agony and works her way back. When she gets there, she follows the chain as it gets bloodier and eventually terminates in a sloppy, wet pile of meat. Richard happened to be going out that way at that time and arrived exactly when he was needed. It's not clear what could have done this, so he gathers some little black pellets as evidence before they go. Richard goes on to address the issue with the mayor, who wants Intech to take a first look at the situation out there since it is their land, and he gave them sovereign immunity. Then Beth shows up and it creates the appearance of being pulled between two opposing forces. She chooses Richard and they work to settle some old hurts as she admits she left to get out from under the negative vibes of the town, you know? But not him, he's cool. Meanwhile, Elias checks in with his contact at Intech to make sure everything is under control, and we're left to wonder exactly what he means by this. Out at the scrapyard, Jake spends his evening chasing off rats, as if that isn't their home as well. In his enthusiasm, he very nearly goes dick out in his little long johns. He turns a corner to discover that his quarry was already butchered by a different predator, a predator that currently has him surrounded on all sides. His only hope at this point is to pretend like he's asleep, which works about as well as you'd expect. The next morning, Richard's finally able to cut the angle on Homer and try to see if he can get sprayed, but the island keeps him busy, so he offers a DIY alternative. Over at the diner, the fellers are talking about normal stuff, like dead dogs and the return of the chief's old love interest. This could be okay, except they get quiet as soon as he arrives, making the atmosphere quite awkward. Out at the landing strip, Dr. Hubbard has arrived to address the Intech complications. They reconvene at the mayor's residence to set up a plan that involves the doctor, alone, investigating the probable cause. It is private property after all. The police have no jurisdiction. Dr. Hubbard gets all up in them guts and is not squeamish whatsoever. This may be due to a passing familiarity.
Is it them?
Richard asks for a quick background check on their new friend, and then is dispatched to Perkins Meat Market to help with a meat-related problem. Jen rushes out to cram an empty T-bone in his grill, and the first thought again is that this must have been some sort of misbegotten prank. In pursuit of their hunch, Dr. Hubbard attempts to verify the culprit with a trap while also satisfying her sick side. Very soon they hear a familiar buzzing sound and, with their advanced tech, are able to focus the scourge into their little box. They return to the lighthouse with their sample.
Very brave, very strange creatures.
Where she gushes over them like they were her children. She does admire their capacity for parthenogenesis, and even becomes enraptured in pleasure when they begin to nibble on her digits. Homer and Lily are conducting business at the diner when Beth walks in. To be fair, we don't have any idea if she's aware of Richard's history with Lillian, but just to be sure, she lays it all out there about how she's living a trash life, and Richard is the only thing on this godforsaken island worth crossing the street for. Instead of addressing or resolving this, Beth goes back home and begins sorting through some old boxes of things. She runs across Intech's development plans someone printed out on the old Commodore. This compels her to investigate, and she breaches the outer perimeter this time, and inside the walls finds a boneyard of mutilated corpses. Back at the lighthouse, Elias insists that they kill the little vermin. The doctor's chosen method is to gas them one at a time after they've had a good meal, but it ends up taking a significant concentration to even accomplish that. A dose this large is lethal even to humans, so widespread application is risky. The mayor laments going along with this plan and is even on the verge of calling for an evacuation of the island, but Dr. Hubbard convinces him to give her 24 hours to attempt an alternate method. Beth marches along in her high tops and Jordashes until she comes across the old mine. It's well secured, but she slips through like a little rat and finds a spot where she and Richard used to make love in the fertile soil. Speaking of, the chief flags down Homer again, and after careful examination, he identifies the strange leavings as Thanksgiving dinner-sized cockroach turds. However, it is unusual to find them eating meat. Then Millie calls in to spill the beans on Dr. Hubbard. She was an MIT geneticist who was expelled for conducting illegal experiments. They share this on an open frequency, although that is inconsequential. Deeper in the mine, Beth finds a cache of high explosives that were left behind. A familiar buzzing sound sends her deeper into the crevasse, where she's startled to find some gooey sacks dangling from the ceiling. This is too surreal for her, so she takes off running toward the cave's back door and begins crowning just in time. Later on, Richard tries to administer a dressing down, but he really doesn't know what he's dealing with here. Plus, Hubbard has everything under control, so he can save that for someone else. Elias pleads for his trust, even though he hasn't shown himself to be trustworthy, so Richard tenders his resignation. At the diner, we find Church taking out the trash, but the dumpster's looking pretty full. When that happens, you gotta tamp it down. But when he tries to get in there, he is surprised to find that he's being eaten in little bits by a bunch of roaches. Now free to pursue any course of action they'd like, Richard takes Beth back to his house so she can clean up. She confides that she's been longing all this time for the emotional comfort she cannot get from her father, and Richard endeavors to provide a solution to her daddy issues while nearby her shirt begins to give birth. No one's checked in on Jake in a while, but Homer arrives ready for their traditional moonshine and checkers. But he finds that Jake's most tender face meat has been greedily consumed by the roaches, which sends Homer screaming into the night. Johnson has finally gotten the CEO of Intech on the line. He wants to keep things quiet, but this is a bridge too far for Johnson, so he agrees to send over a task force. The young lovers lay in bed, legs and arms entwined, and Beth tries to convince Richard to come back with her to LA. He's more of a small town boy, but her offer's not looking too bad at the moment, as they are literally living in hell. When he gets back in touch with dispatch, he's informed that reports of bodies are coming in from all over town. Speaking of which, we find Jenny in her finest negligee delivering dinner to her aunt too fast. She rushes it a little, but she vacuumed a couple of days ago, so it's all good. When she delivers the victuals, we pan down to find she's been leaving a little snail trail of what we hope was syrup. Then, as she playfully cycles through the most recent stylings with her music blasting, Auntie can't even load up her first bite before the foul beasts emerge. They quickly take to feasting on her captive ankle flesh, and then, for the third video in a row, come in her mouth. Hubbard carries on and can't help but be at least a little proud of her good work, recognizing now that the second-generation hatchlings are completely immune to all pesticides. Meanwhile, Richard loads up some bodies in Cy's truck to be taken into town, and then they decide to return to Father's house to squeeze some info out of him. The mayor at that moment happens to be finalizing plans to spray the whole town in the morning with a deadly dose of gas. However, the phone lines become jammed with roaches and the call breaks up. So it's not clear if they got word to abort the mission if the lighthouse is lit, as that will indicate the residents failed to evacuate. Yeah, I'm sure it's fine. As Sai makes his way into town, the bodies are predictably riddled with some bugs, and he is predictably clueless, right up until them suckers start chewing on him. Unfortunately, they take their treat right as he reaches the old bridge, making the cost of his distraction quite steep. In a much more comical scene, Lillian handles her infestation in a way that guarantees the diner will never pass code inspection again. Also, probably a little too lighthearted, considering the likely inevitable outcome, sadly. Elias finally builds up the courage to let the sicko doctor know that a spraying has been arranged for the morning. In response, she drops the news about their immunity to the pesticide. Dadgummit, that is frustrating. If that's the case, she might as well go ahead and fire up the lighthouse to ensure the mission is aborted. Back at the rat shack, Homer's cooking up a special brew for these little suckers, and, being a dirtbag, discovers the true solution to an infestation of this intensity. But does he have the balls to employ it broadly? Daddy's in the process of sorting out some details with Hubbard when Beth storms in to demand answers.
Dad, what's going on this island?
Not now, damn it! While Richard circled back around at the station, only to find that young Millie is now dispatching emergency personnel in heaven. Oh boy. He then traipses into the diner hoping he might have gotten a guilt-free break from his second choice, and when he appears to have achieved this, he spends his time with a tear-soaked goodbye rather than checking for a pulse. Nah, she dead. He quickly draws on Homer even though their enemy is roaches, which are not at eye level. As they try to determine the next objective, Hubbard gets on the radio to announce her difficulties with the lighthouse, so they go there. The calls go otherwise unheeded, as repairing his broken relationship is more important than the island of 700 people he was trying to help when he initiated this roach project to begin with. With losses mounting, the boys are pretty hot.
I wish you were a man.
Because I can't punch you, but I sure will shoot you. Through the combined explanatory efforts of Hubbard and Elias, we learned the goal here was to make roaches that eat roaches and then die themselves, eliminating the need for pesticides. By agreeing to test on the island, they were looking at a healthy payout from Intech for the modernization project. The pests seem to have developed a social structure, indicating the central queen colony scenario we'd come to be familiar with. They'll need to address that, but start with the immediate problem of trying to get the lighthouse lit up. Back at the Johnson residence, the roaches are taken over, but they do have several towels and a double-barrel shotgun. In addition to this, Hubbard gives them the idea to try to freeze the vermin out with CO2 from a fire extinguisher. This seems to be somewhat effective, but they are swarming from every hole. They do the best they can with their limited supply of fire extinguishers, and it's opposite. But when a rug gets stuck in the bathroom door, Elias takes this as his chance to make the ultimate sacrifice to ensure his daughter's safety and ensure the continuation of the Johnson family name. Things are no better at the lighthouse, as a giant egg pod has been left unattended and begins sputtering its thick, milky payload all over. This causes Hubbard to become intoxicated by the unmitigated success of her project, which now appears to count a reanimated cat carcass among its achievements. Richard sends Homer to retrieve the gun and nearly pays for that decision with his life. But then Homer's clumsy nature comes in clutch when he attempts an unsafe and unnecessary maneuver. As they clean up, we see Hubbard's natural curiosity begin to take hold, and then they get the light running with a whole hour to spare. Beth has been sulking in her airtight closet for a while, but then remembers that grits are half off before 6 at the diner, so she slowly ventures out. The radio crackles to life, and as they begin to coordinate, we learn that the hybridization consequence is applicable to all of the meals in which their DNA has commingled. She discovers her folly too late, but this does provide her with the front row seat to her father's great awakening. She manages to fire and reload, ultimately ending his second chance at life with a headshot right as Richard arrives. This might have brought a moment of respite, except that the lighthouse goes back out again. The chief attempts to reassert his authority, which means nothing to Hubbard, who takes off with Beth to be shown the nest. So the boys head back to the lighthouse to see if they can get her going again. Along the way, their vehicle begins spewing roaches from every crack and crevice. They fight them until the works are so gummed up the car comes to a rest. When they notice the roaches moving off in unison, it's assumed this must be due to a threat to the queen. So Richard goes in that direction while Homer addresses the lighthouse. Sure enough, the ladies had made it to the cave and collected the explosives, which they then took to the location where the goose sacks once hung. Luckily, Beth knows how to read schematics because Hubbard's curiosity begins acting up again. She must bear witness to the fruits of her labors and she longs for a sample to study in more detail. But when the queen confronts her, she realizes that was a silly ambition. She is grasped so firmly that her struggle to get free causes her to rip her own arm off. And the queen's like, what? With less than a minute left, Homer gets the lighthouse lit up while Richard washes ashore. Being familiar with the back door, he dives in face first. And now that the doctor is no longer a concern, he only has to extricate Beth at the last second. When all is said and done, they rise to a new dawn, and as the helicopter thumps overhead, ponder this new existence in which nothing they once knew exists any longer. And that is what happens when you try to branch out and experience new things, which is why I don't do that. If that wasn't too much for you, be sure to check out this video next. Now that we're here, I want to congratulate you for making it to the end of the video and affirm that you are a very special person because of it. And if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to become part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.